would you like to comment for Scotland? Do you have different rules in Scotland? Or?
We do for quite a lot of things, but I think as far as data ownership, I think it's reckoned to not really be a very helpful concept. So we try and steer away from arguments about who owns it, because nobody really owns it. It's who controls it or who guards it or who makes sure that it's used wisely.
Let me put it a different way round. I mean, which does happen. Hospitals sell data. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a very important thing in terms of the organisations they work with and the utility of that data to have a beneficial impact. I mean, there is a economic model that's required to happen there. But I mean, there are various viewpoints about whether that should happen or not, and who actually owns the data and who should get the benefit. I mean, let's address it from maybe that side, and maybe we could start from the US perspective.
There's been one of the sea changes that has happened in the US, it preceded the development of electronic records, was this notion that the patient owns the record. That's the owner. And that was fine when you had this physical thing that was called a record. You could say, okay, we'll make copies of this form and that page. But to your point, it's now virtual. It's data out there now. So in terms of any identifiable data, I have control. I should have control over that. If it's de-identified, and literally I cannot be identified in that record, that is a function of the system now. Yeah. And for example, if the hospital in a paper record environment wanted to go through and take the time to build a spreadsheet off of paper records to aggregate data to do some kind of analysis, most patients would not say, I own that, so therefore you owe me a piece of that, because they put the work in to get it. Well, the same thing's true in an electronic environment. The hospital or the healthcare center has built the electronic environment in such a way as to aggregate that data, but they do have a responsibility to protect the patient's identity, and they cannot release it under those circumstances.
So that's really a data controller role. So the data
That's
controllers have the responsibility.
That's right.
Right. Right. You're the custodian, really.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any other comments on that? Oh.
So I would agree with that. I think the identity in terms of the patient is the issue, and just like bank data, it's kind of identity theft type stuff. But banks sell all your bank data anyway to credit agencies and left, right, and centre, and they don't ask you permission for it, I suspect. And I suspect health data is far more valuable in many ways than financial data, and we're only just exploring the tip of the iceberg around its potential to actually cure disease and do predictability around individual diseases, given the wealth of pharmacological interventions and all of the genetic kind of data that's available to us. It'd be interesting to look at the genetic debate that's been happening and see what the cross-reference is, because I'm not quite sure there is so much information, so much interest in who owns that data. But so I believe that exactly what's just been described is and makes sense. Of course, you only get into ownership issues really when you're talking about value or you're talking about a threat, and it's almost once you get into those issues, it's far too late in the debate, because then people entrench and then we get involved in all sorts of very difficult conversations. And I think we need to start, again, being very clear about what are the benefits, what's our vision, how are we going to use this data, how are people going to benefit from it, and how is it in all of our interests, whether we are a GP or whether we're a hospital or whether we are a research organisation or a pharma company, to actually work together to maximise the benefits this new era and this new technology will bring.
Any comments from the audience on that one?
Just to add, just to add to that, really, it was the idea that, as I understand it, the major developments in the internet have been made by the porn industry. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important to recognise. They're a fairly seedy and, as I understand it, moral, corrupt body of people. And yet, as I understand, the major drivers for huge change, which are being used now legitimately. I think for me it's this case about who protects the individuals. Yeah. And there is no doubt at all now that it's not just a case of perhaps special branch or whatever being able to access things about you that you need to know. It's little Timmy up the road who's 10 years old, can get on his laptop and can find things out about you that you may not want known. And I say that as somebody who has been in the situation working with people that were quite dangerous, and those people who work in mental health, who may be working with people with various fixations, are at risk. And I think we don't necessarily credit that enough at the moment because of all the benefits that you make. And I think that unless you get that publicity across and enable people to understand why you're doing what you're doing, things like the gentleman who was kicked to death in Derby because a policeman illegally accessed data and gave it to somebody he shouldn't have done will stand out and will put you back years. And I think you will have problems. I genuinely do.
Yeah, I think that I only run a small organisation, so it's easy for me to speak. But I mean, in my organisation, we repeatedly train people, and every time somebody comes in, it's a continuous reminder to the staff about what their responsibilities are. But I think a lot of this in the larger trust with staff that are, people have been in the organisations for 40, 50 years sometimes, and don't even have contracts. There is a huge requirement for training about these responsibilities, otherwise things will happen. Yeah.
I just want to go back and make sure I heard this correctly. There's porn on the internet?
That's not a university provision.
I see. Okay. It's interesting. I mean, they were also the leaders on the development of the VHS tape. That's what drove the VHS. That's why VHS beat out Betamax back in the day. Is because there was so much more volume on VHS tapes than porn that Beta couldn't survive, even though it's a better format.
It's still the best, though, the VHS. I love it.
You love VHS. Yeah.
Okay, I have a...
right up there on the cutting edge of 1980s technology, aren't you?
I've still got some Betamax, too, if you want to come around. It's pretty rare and valuable. I'm not going to let you take it back to the States, though. All right, I had a written question here from Jamie Grace. Did we answer all your question for you within the other questions? Yeah.
Just here. I'm from the University of Derby as well, as it happens. I think you have.
What did you have for lunch?
I think you have indirectly. I was asking what I thought was, as a law lecturer, a fairly provocative question, which is, I just wanted to see what the feeling was about law and regulation in eHealth. And so, I mean, I have my own opinion, right? And it's not my lecture, it's not my purpose here today. But it's interesting that there are some discrepancies, not just with the international context, but from those representatives in the UK. There are discrepancies in what you say and the way things should be done as a lawyer might see it, and that was what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I think, and this doesn't just apply to patient data, it applies to all aspects of law, I think, and particularly in a corporate setting, is that unless the people know what they're doing and the controls and governance that they have to put in place, it doesn't matter if you've got law or not. So I think the big thing that I was talking about earlier was all of the stages and processes we put in place to ensure that is governed, the process is governed properly. And of course, we have very sophisticated legal contracts around the data and liability and risk and insurance and so on. But I think it's really about training the people and putting the proper process in place. And I know that others have comments on that.
Yeah, if we have differing views, we respect your right to be wrong.
Any more comments on the legal side?
I think sometimes it is very, very difficult. We've all got professional obligations which we sign up to. We've all got contracts that we sign when we're employed, and as well as that, there's all the legislation like the Data Protection Act, and sometimes sort of weaving a way between them all can be tricky. But then we've got called the guardians to help us, and we've got information commissioners who can pronounce judgment on whether we do the right thing or not. But I think it is a bit of a balance at the end of the day as well.
We're crawled over all the time. You can tell. Look at my bag; it's covered in footprints. Well, I think with that, I'd like to thank the panel and.